The day I discovered my family had sold me like livestock was the day I stopped believing in love. But it was also the day I started planning their destruction. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Water cascaded down my face as I stood in the shower, finally feeling clean after another grueling 12-hour shift at the diner. Working double shifts had become routine since I turned 18, anything to save enough money to escape this suffocating house. The steam fogged the bathroom mirror, creating a barrier between me and the reflection I'd grown to hate. "Janice, honey, you've been in there forever," came my stepmother Patricia's sickeningly sweet voice through the door. Something about her tone made my skin crawl more than usual. "Just finishing up," I called back, quickly rinsing the shampoo from my dark hair. As I reached for my towel, the bathroom door creaked open. My blood ran cold as I saw my stepfather Robert's leering face in the crack. "Robert, get out!" I screamed, clutching the shower curtain to cover myself. Now, Janice, no need to be shy. We're family after all." His bloodshot eyes roamed over what little he could see, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath even from across the bathroom. I said, "Get out!" He stepped fully into the bathroom, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a death sentence. "You know, your mother and I have been discussing your contribution to this household. You've been living here rent-free for 18 years. Don't you think it's time you showed some gratitude?" My heart hammered against my ribcage as he took another step closer. The small bathroom suddenly felt like a prison cell. "I pay you rent every month from my job. I clean this entire house. What more do you want?" Robert's laugh was cold and predatory. "Oh, sweet little Janice, there are other ways to show appreciation, ways that don't involve money." Before I could react, his hand shot out toward me. I jerked backward, slipping on the wet bathroom floor and crashing into the wall. Pain shot through my shoulder, but adrenaline kept me moving. "Patricia!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. "Patricia, help me!" Footsteps thundered down the hallway, and the door burst open. But instead of the rescue I'd hoped for, Patricia stood there with her arms crossed, looking more annoyed than concerned. "What's all this screaming about?" she asked, as if she couldn't see her husband cornering her stepdaughter in the bathroom. "He was trying to," I started, but Robert cut me off. "I was just trying to talk to the girl about her attitude problem. She's been disrespectful lately, don't you think?" Patricia's cold blue eyes studied me like I was an insect she'd found crawling across her kitchen counter. "Janice, you need to learn to show Robert the respect he deserves. He's been good to you." The betrayal hit me harder than any physical blow could have. "Good to me? He just tried to—" "Enough," Patricia snapped. "Robert works hard to keep a roof over your head. The least you can do is be civil." I stared at both of them in horror, realizing that Patricia wasn't just enabling Robert's behavior, she was actively protecting it. My own stepmother was choosing him over my safety. "Get dressed," Robert ordered, his voice returning to its usual gruff tone now that he had Patricia's support. They left me alone in the bathroom, my entire body shaking with rage and fear. I dressed quickly in jeans and an old sweater, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe I could call my friend Emma. Maybe I could leave tonight instead of waiting until I had enough money saved. But when I emerged from the bathroom, I found Robert and Patricia waiting for me in the living room, along with two men I'd never seen before. One was a tall, thin man in an expensive-looking gray suit, his silver hair slicked back perfectly. The other was younger, probably in his 30s, with cold, dark eyes and the kind of build that suggested he was used to getting his way through intimidation. "Janice, come sit down," Patricia said, patting the couch beside her with false sweetness. "Who are these people?" I asked, remaining standing near the doorway. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. "This is Mr. Harrison," Robert said, gesturing to the older man. "And this is his associate, Marcus. They're here to discuss a business proposition." Mr. Harrison stood up, smoothing his tie as he looked at me over like I was a car he was considering purchasing. Miss Janice, isn't it? Your parents have told me so much about you. They're not my parents, I said firmly. My parents died when I was 7. Of course, my apologies, Harrison said with a smile that never reached his eyes. Your guardians, then. They've been telling me about your situation, how you're eager to start a new life, make something of yourself. I glanced between Robert and Patricia, trying to read their expressions. Patricia was fidgeting with her wedding ring, refusing to meet my eyes. Robert was staring at the floor, his jaw clenched tight. What kind of business proposition? I asked slowly. Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice low and gravelly. The kind that would set your family up for life. Clear their debts, give them a fresh start. What debts? I turned to face Robert and Patricia directly. What is he talking about? Robert finally looked up, and I saw something that might have been shame flicker across his face before it hardened into resolve. We've had some financial difficulties, Janice, more than you know. The house is 3 months behind mortgage payments, Patricia added quietly. Robert lost his job 6 weeks ago. We're going to lose everything. My mind reeled. But you told me Robert was still working. You've been taking my rent money every month. Your rent money was barely covering groceries, Robert snapped. It wasn't even close to what we needed. Harrison cleared his throat, which is where our arrangement comes in. You see, Miss Janice, I have clients who are looking for companionship, young, attractive women who can provide entertainment and comfort. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The words hit me like ice water. Entertainment? What are you talking about? High-end escort services, Marcus said bluntly. Rich men who pay very well for the right kind of company. I took a step backward, my hand gripping the doorframe. You want me to be a prostitute? Such an ugly word, Harrison said with distaste. Think of it more as luxury hospitality. You'd be well taken care of, I assure you. Nice clothes, beautiful apartments, the finest restaurants. And your family would receive $50,000 up front, Marcus added, plus a monthly stipend for as long as you're in our employ. I stared at Robert and Patricia in absolute horror. You're trying to sell me. It's not like that, Harrison said with distaste. Think of it more as luxury hospitality. You'd be well taken care of, I assure you. Nice clothes, beautiful apartments, the finest restaurants. And your family would receive $50,000 up front, Marcus added, plus a monthly stipend for as long as you're in our employ. I stared at Robert and Patricia in absolute horror. You're trying to sell me. It's not like that, Harrison said with distaste. Think of it more as luxury hospitality. You'd be well taken care of, I assure you. Nice clothes, beautiful apartments, the finest restaurants. And your family would receive $50,000 up front, Marcus added, plus a monthly stipend for as long as you're in our employ. I stared at Robert and Patricia in absolute horror. You're trying to sell me. It's not like that, Patricia said quickly, but her voice was shaking. It's just, it would solve all our problems. You'd be helping the family. Helping the family? I repeated, my voice rising to a near shriek. You want me to sell my body to strange men so you can pay your bills? Janice, please, Robert said, standing up. Just think about it rationally. You're 18 now. You're going to move out anyway. This way, everyone benefits. Everyone except me, I screamed. I'm not your property to sell. Harrison exchanged a look with Marcus before speaking again. Perhaps we should give you some time to consider the offer. It's a lot to process, I understand. There's nothing to consider, I said firmly. I'm not doing it. Find another way to pay your debts. Marcus smiled, but it was the kind of smile a shark might give its prey. I'm afraid it's not quite that simple, Miss Janice. You see, your guardians have already accepted our down payment. The room started spinning. What? Patricia pulled out an envelope from behind a couch cushion, her hands trembling as she showed me the stack of cash inside. It's already done, honey. We signed the papers this morning. You signed papers? What papers? Harrison produced a manila folder from his briefcase. Guardianship transfer documents. Since you're still financially dependent on Robert and Patricia, and they're your legal guardians until you're 21, they have the right to make certain decisions on your behalf. That's not legal, I said desperately. You can't just sell people. This is America. Of course not, Harrison agreed smoothly. These are employment contracts. You'll be working as a hostess for our entertainment company. Everything is completely above board. I snatched the papers from his hands, scanning the dense legal text. Words like exclusive employment, company housing, and breach of contract penalties jumped out at me. The monthly salary listed was substantial, but there were so many deductions and fees that it was clear I'd never see most of it. This is slavery, I whispered. This is business, Marcus corrected, and your family has already spent the advance. If you refuse to honor the contract, they'll be required to pay back the full amount immediately, plus penalties and interest. I believe the total would be around $200,000. I looked at Robert and Patricia, seeing the truth in their guilty expressions. They'd trapped me. Even if I could somehow escape, they'd be financially ruined, and somehow I knew they'd find a way to blame me for that too. When? I asked quietly. Tomorrow morning, Harrison said. A car will pick you up at 8 a.m. sharp. You'll want to pack light. We'll provide everything you need once you're settled. As the two men gathered their papers and prepared to leave, Harrison paused at the door. Oh, and Miss Janice, I'd strongly advise against any thoughts of running away. Marcus here is very good at finding people who try to breach their contracts, and the penalties for your family would be severe. After they left, the three of us sat in suffocating silence. I felt numb, like I was watching this happen to someone else. Janice, Patricia finally said, I know you're angry, but don't. I stood up slowly, looking down at the two people who had just sold me like cattle. Don't you dare try to justify this. We didn't have a choice, Robert said weakly. There's always a choice, I replied. You chose money over me. You chose your own comfort over my safety and freedom. I walked toward the stairs, then stopped and turned back to face them one last time. But here's what you don't understand, I said. You think you've solved your problems by getting rid of me, but you've actually created a much bigger one. What do you mean? Patricia asked nervously. I smiled, and I knew it wasn't a pleasant expression. I mean that someday I'm going to come back, and when I do, I'm going to destroy both of you so completely that you'll wish you'd never been born. Robert laughed nervously. Janice, don't be dramatic. You're just upset. I'm not being dramatic, I said quietly. I'm making a promise. You want to sell me like I'm nothing? Fine, but don't expect me to stay nothing forever. I climbed the stairs to my room, leaving them in stunned silence below. As I began packing the few belongings that mattered to me, I wasn't thinking about escape anymore. I was thinking about revenge. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They thought they were getting rid of a problem, but they were actually creating their worst nightmare. Because the scared, helpless girl they'd just sold was about to die. And in her place, someone much more dangerous was about to be born. The last thing I packed was my mother's jewelry box, the only thing I had left of my real parents. As I held it, I made a silent vow to their memory. Robert and Patricia would pay for what they did. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. And when that day came, they'd realize that money wasn't the only thing in the world worth fighting for. Sometimes revenge was worth much more. The black sedan arrived at exactly 8 a.m., just as Harrison had promised. I watched from my bedroom window as Marcus stepped out, straightening his dark suit jacket. He didn't bother knocking, just stood by the car, like a funeral director waiting for a corpse. I grabbed my single duffel bag and walked downstairs. Robert was hiding in the kitchen, but Patricia stood by the front door, wringing her hands. "Janice, I want you to know that we—" "Save it," I cut her off, brushing past her without a second glance. Marcus opened the car door for me with mock politeness. "Good morning, Miss Janice. I trust you slept well?" I didn't respond, sliding into the leather seat and staring straight ahead. As we pulled away from the house, I didn't look back. That chapter of my life was over. The drive took us through downtown Seattle, past the familiar diner where I'd worked, past the community college I'd planned to attend. Everything I'd worked toward was disappearing in the rearview mirror. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. "Your new home," Marcus replied. "A high-rise apartment in Belltown. Very exclusive." The building was indeed impressive, 40 stories of glass and steel reaching toward the cloudy sky. Marcus led me through a marble lobby, past a doorman who averted his eyes, as if he knew exactly what kind of business brought young women to this building. The elevator climbed to the 32nd floor, opening onto a hallway lined with expensive artwork. Marcus stopped at apartment 3247 and handed me a keycard. "Your home for the foreseeable future," he announced, opening the door. The apartment was beautiful, I had to admit. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of Elliott Bay. The furniture was modern and expensive, all clean lines and neutral colors. A fully stocked kitchen, a living room that could have been featured in a magazine, and a bedroom larger than my entire space back at Robert and Patricia's house. "Impressive, isn't it?" came Harrison's voice from behind me. I spun around to find him emerging from what appeared to be a second bedroom that had been converted into an office. "We spare no expense for our girls," he continued. "You'll find a complete wardrobe in the closet, all in your size. Makeup, jewelry, everything you could need." I walked to the closet and opened it, finding dozens of dresses, shoes, and outfits that probably cost more than I'd made in 6 months at the diner. Everything was elegant, expensive, and designed to make a woman look like the perfect accessory for a wealthy man. "Your first client is tonight," Harrison said matter-of-factly. "Mr. Blackwood. He's one of our regulars. Very generous, very discreet. He's specifically requested a newcomer." "What exactly am I supposed to do?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Marcus answered with a cruel smile. "Whatever he pays for." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. A woman named Victoria arrived to do my hair and makeup, transforming me from a tired diner waitress into something that belonged on a magazine cover. She worked in silence, occasionally muttering instructions like, "Hold still," or "Close your eyes." When she was finished, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. The girl looking back at me was sophisticated, elegant, and completely foreign. "Remember," Harrison said as he prepared to leave, "you represent our organization now. Your behavior reflects on all of us. Disappoint Mr. Blackwood, and there will be consequences." After they left, I sat alone in the apartment, staring out at the city lights beginning to twinkle as evening approached. I thought about calling Emma, my friend from the diner, but what would I say? That I'd been sold into prostitution by my own family? At 7 p.m., another car arrived. This time, the driver was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "You must be Janice," she said gently. "I'm Margaret. I'll be taking you to dinner." The restaurant was the kind of place I'd only seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, servers who moved like dancers. Margaret led me to a corner table where a man in his 60s sat reading a newspaper. Thomas Blackwood was not what I'd expected. He was distinguished-looking, with silver hair and intelligent gray eyes. His suit was impeccably tailored, and when he stood to greet me, his manners were perfect. "Miss Janice," he said, taking my hand and kissing it lightly. "You're even more beautiful than Harrison described." As we sat down, I found myself studying his face, trying to read his intentions.
He ordered wine, something expensive that I'd never heard of, and began making pleasant conversation about the weather, the restaurant, and the view from our table. "You seem nervous," he observed after our appetizers arrived. "I am," I admitted. He nodded thoughtfully. "This is your first time doing this." It wasn't a question. Somehow he could tell. "Harrison mentioned you might need some guidance," Thomas continued. "I want you to know that I'm not the monster you're probably imagining." I looked up from my untouched food. "Then what are you?" "A lonely man who pays for companionship, because the alternative is sitting alone in an empty house every night, thinking about everything I've lost." There was genuine sadness in his voice, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "My wife died 3 years ago," he continued. 42 years of marriage. I don't know how to be alone." "So you buy women to pretend to care about you?" He winced at my bluntness. "When you put it like that, it sounds rather pathetic, doesn't it?" We ate in relative silence after that. Thomas told me about his shipping business, his grown children who lived across the country, his charity work. He was trying to humanize himself, I realized, trying to make this transaction feel like something other than what it was. After dinner, he drove me back to his house, a mansion overlooking Lake Washington that was even more impressive than my apartment. The interior was decorated with obvious feminine touches that hadn't been changed since his wife's death. "Would you like some coffee?" he asked, leading me into a sitting room lined with bookshelves. "Sure," I replied, grateful for any delay. As he prepared the coffee, I studied the family photographs covering every surface. Thomas with a beautiful blonde woman at various stages of their lives, wedding photos, vacation pictures, children, grandchildren, a whole life lived together. "She was lovely," I said when he returned with 2 steaming cups. "She was everything to me," he replied quietly. "I know this arrangement is strange, Janice. I know you don't want to be here. But I need you to understand that I'm not going to hurt you." I sat down across from him, holding the warm cup between my hands. "What do you want from me?" "Conversation, companionship, someone to have dinner with, someone to talk to about books and movies and life, someone who won't look at me with pity. That's all?" He met my eyes directly. "I'm 73 years old, my dear. My needs are far simpler than you might imagine." We talked for hours. He was intelligent, well-read, and surprisingly funny. He told me stories about his business, his travels with his wife, his regrets and hopes. Despite everything, I found myself almost enjoying his company. When he drove me home that night, he handed me an envelope. "Your payment," he said simply. Inside was more money than I'd ever held in my life, $5,000 in cash. "This seems like too much," I said. "You gave me exactly what I needed," he replied. "A pleasant evening with an intelligent young woman. That's worth far more than money to me." As I rode the elevator back to my apartment, I found myself thinking about Thomas Blackwood. He wasn't evil, not really. He was just a sad, lonely old man who'd found himself trapped in the same system that had trapped me.
But his sadness didn't change my situation. I was still a prisoner, still property to be bought and sold. And somewhere in Seattle, Robert and Patricia were probably celebrating their newfound wealth, never giving a second thought to what they'd done to me. I put the money in a drawer and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. One client down, countless more to go. But each payment was adding to a fund that Robert and Patricia didn't know about. Each night I survived was making me stronger, smarter, more determined. They thought they'd gotten rid of me. They thought they'd solved their problems at my expense. But I was still here. I was still fighting. And every dollar I earned, every lesson I learned, every connection I made in this dark world was bringing me one step closer to the day when I'd return to collect what they owed me. Thomas had given me more than money that night. He'd given me hope. If I could survive this, if I could turn this nightmare into an opportunity, then maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to turn the tables on everyone who had wronged me. The girl they'd sold was learning to play their game, and she was going to play it better than they ever imagined. 3 months into my new life, I had learned to read men like books.
The nervous ones who apologized constantly. The aggressive ones who tried to assert dominance immediately. The broken ones, like Thomas, who just wanted someone to listen. Each type required a different approach, a different mask. But it was the powerful ones who interested me most. Your reputation is growing, Harrison informed me during one of our weekly meetings in my apartment. Several high-profile clients have specifically requested you. I sat across from him, sipping tea and maintaining the calm demeanor I'd perfected, such as, Judge Morrison wants dinner next Friday, Senator Walsh is hosting a charity gala and needs a companion, and, he paused dramatically, David Chen. The name meant nothing to me, but Harrison's tone suggested it should. Tech billionaire, Marcus explained from his position by the window, owns half the digital infrastructure in the Pacific Northwest, very private, very selective about his associates. What makes him special? I asked. Harrison leaned forward. He's the kind of client who can change your entire situation, Janice. His generosity is legendary, but so is his influence. Women who impress him find themselves with opportunities they never imagined. I nodded thoughtfully, already calculating. Each client taught me something new about power, about leverage, about the networks that really ran the city. Judge Morrison had let slip details about ongoing cases after his third glass of wine. Senator Walsh had bragged about backroom deals while trying to impress me. They all underestimated me. They saw a pretty young woman and assumed I was an empty-headed decoration. It was their first mistake. That evening, I had dinner with a real estate developer named Bradley Richmond. He was one of my regulars, a married man with political ambitions who paid extra for absolute discretion. You're different tonight, he observed, as we sat in the private dining room of an exclusive club, more focused. Just thinking about the future, I replied, cutting into my salmon. What kind of future? I looked up at him with practiced innocence. I've been considering investments, learning about business. You've mentioned real estate opportunities before. Bradley's eyes lit up. Men loved feeling like mentors, especially to beautiful women who hung on their every word. Real estate is where the real money is, he said, launching into a detailed explanation of his current projects. I'm developing a waterfront complex in Tacoma right now. Luxury condos, high-end retail, the profit margins are incredible. As he talked, I memorized every detail, project costs, profit projections, the city officials he'd bribed to fast-track permits. He thought he was impressing me with his success. He was actually giving me ammunition. How does someone get started in that business? I asked with wide-eyed curiosity. Capital, connections, and knowing which palms to grease, he said with a laugh. But someone like you, with your looks and charm, you could find investors easily. Really? Absolutely. In fact, I know several wealthy men who love backing beautiful entrepreneurs. It's a win-win. They get to feel important, you get the funding you need. When he drove me home that night, I pretended to be flustered by his attention, grateful for his mentorship. Inside, I was cataloging everything I'd learned. Bradley Richmond was corruption in an expensive suit, and he'd just taught me exactly how the game was played. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and began typing. I'd started keeping detailed records of every client, their businesses, their secrets, their weaknesses. What had begun as a survival mechanism was evolving into something much more strategic. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard good things about you. Coffee tomorrow? DC. David Chen. Moving faster than I'd expected. The next morning, I dressed carefully in a tailored business suit rather than the cocktail dresses most clients preferred. If Chen was as intelligent as his reputation suggested, he'd appreciate subtlety over obvious sexuality. We met at a small cafe in Pioneer Square, far from the upscale restaurants where I usually conduct business. Chen was younger than most of my clients, maybe 40, with sharp features and calculating eyes that missed nothing. "You're not what I expected," he said after we'd ordered coffee. "What did you expect?" "Someone more typical. Harrison's girls usually have a certain look, a certain emptiness behind their eyes." I sipped my coffee calmly. And what do you see behind mine? He studied me for a long moment. Intelligence, anger, ambition, much more interesting than emptiness. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like someone was actually seeing me rather than just looking at me. Harrison says you're one of his best, Chen continued, but I don't think you plan to stay in his employ forever. It wasn't a question. I met his gaze steadily. No, I don't. Good. Ambition is attractive. Complacency is boring. We talked for 2 hours. Unlike other clients who either treated me like a beautiful object or poured out their sob stories, Chen engaged me as an equal. He asked about my thoughts on technology, business, and the changing economy. He seemed genuinely interested in my opinions. I have a proposition, he said as we prepared to leave. I'm hosting a dinner party next weekend. Tech executives, venture capitalists, political figures. I need someone who can hold intelligent conversations, make connections, and observe details.
You want me to work the room. I want you to be my eyes and ears. These people reveal more about themselves at dinner parties than they do in boardrooms. Information is valuable, and you strike me as someone who knows how to collect it. The payment he offered was staggering, more than I usually made in a month. But it wasn't the money that excited me, it was the access. Why me? I asked. Because you're smart enough to understand what you're seeing and motivated enough to remember every detail. Plus, they'll underestimate you. It's perfect. That night, I called Thomas Blackwood. He'd become something of a mentor to me, the closest thing I had to a friend in this dark world. You sound different, he observed after I'd told him about Chen's offer. How so? More confident, more dangerous. I smiled at that. Maybe I am. Be careful, Janice. David Chen isn't like other men you've dealt with. He's brilliant, ruthless, and he always has an agenda. Make sure you understand what you're getting into. After we hung up, I stood at my window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Robert and Patricia were probably sleeping peacefully in their saved house, content in the knowledge that their problems had been solved at my expense. They had no idea that their solution was becoming my weapon. Chen's dinner party was a revelation. I mingled with city council members, federal judges, tech moguls, and media executives. I learned about insider trading schemes, tax evasion strategies, and political bribes. I discovered which companies were about to fail and which politicians were about to fall. More importantly, I learned how power really worked. It wasn't about titles or positions, it was about information, connections, and knowing exactly when and how to apply pressure. You exceeded my expectations, Chen told me as the evening wound down. Several guests asked about you. That never happens. They found me interesting? They found you memorable, which, in this business, is far more valuable. As he drove me home, Chen made an unexpected offer. I could use someone like you on a more permanent basis. Not what you're doing now, something legitimate. Executive assistant, business development, strategic planning. The pay would be substantial. For a moment, I was tempted. Chen was offering me an escape, a chance at a real life. But as attractive as the offer was, it wasn't what I wanted. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I have other plans. Such as? I looked out at the city lights, thinking about Robert and Patricia, about Harrison and Marcus, about all the people who thought they owned pieces of me. Revenge, I said simply. Chen laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine appreciation. Now that's honest. Most people pretend they want justice when what they really want is payback. What's the difference? Justice is about balance. Revenge is about satisfaction. He pulled up to my building. For what it's worth, I think whoever wronged you is going to regret it. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and began planning. I had money now, more than Robert and Patricia could imagine. I had information that could destroy powerful people. I had connections throughout the city's elite. Most importantly, I had learned how their world really worked. The same corruption and weakness that had trapped me
could be turned against my enemies. It was time to start phase 2 of my education. I was done being a victim. Now, I was going to become a predator. The photograph arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my apartment door while I slept. I found it when I went to get my coffee, a single image that changed everything. It was Robert and Patricia, standing in front of a brand new BMW, both of them grinning like they'd won the lottery. The luxury car gleamed in the driveway of what was clearly a much nicer house than the one where they'd sold me 6 months ago. On the back, someone had written in red ink, "Thought you'd want to see how your sacrifice paid off. A friend." I stared at the image for a long time, my coffee growing cold in my hands. They'd used my blood money to upgrade their entire life, while I serviced strangers in expensive hotel rooms. The rage that had been simmering inside me for months finally reached a boiling point. That evening, I was scheduled to attend a gallery opening with Senator Walsh. He was running for governor and needed to be seen with beautiful, cultured companions at high society events. Usually, I played the role of arm candy perfectly. Smile, nod, make small talk about art I knew nothing about. Tonight was different. "You seem distracted," Walsh observed as we stood before an abstract painting that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. "I just thinking about investments," I replied, which was becoming my standard response when clients noticed my preoccupation. "What kind of investments?" I turned to face him with the sweet smile I'd perfected. "Private investigation services, actually. I've been wondering if there's money to be made in that industry." Walsh's eyebrows rose. "Unusual interest for someone in your position." "I find people fascinating. Their secrets, their motivations, the lengths they'll go to protect what they value most." I sipped my champagne delicately. "Don't you think knowledge is the most valuable commodity?" Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or warning. "Knowledge can be dangerous, my dear, especially the wrong kind." Or the right kind, depending on your perspective. The next morning, I called a number David Chen had given me weeks earlier. He'd mentioned having contacts in various industries if I ever needed anything off the books. "I need information on 2 people," I told the gravelly voice that answered. "Names: Robert and Patricia Hendricks. They live in Seattle, probably moved recently." "What kind of information?" "Everything. Financial records, employment history, legal troubles, personal habits. I want to know where they shop, where they eat, who they owe money to, and what they're afraid of."
This is personal. Very. The cost is $5,000. Information delivered in 72 hours. I wired the money that afternoon. It was a significant chunk of my savings, but information was an investment. Thomas had taught me that much during our long conversations about business and life. While I waited for the report, I continued my regular appointments. Judge Morrison took me to the opera, where he spent the entire performance whispering about the cases he was hearing. Senator Walsh brought me to another political fundraiser, introducing me to donors and power brokers who saw me as harmless decoration. It was at that fundraiser that I met someone who would prove crucial to my plans. "You're Janice, aren't you?" The woman who approached me was elegant, probably in her 50s, with silver hair and intelligent blue eyes. "I'm Catherine Fairfield." The name was familiar. Fairfield had been in the news recently, something about a high-profile divorce. "I know who you are," I said carefully, "the pharmaceutical heiress." She smiled, but it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Former heiress. My ex-husband made sure of that. But that's not why I wanted to meet you." "Oh?" "You have a reputation among certain circles. They say you're different from Harrison's usual girls. Smarter, more observant." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I have a proposition," Catherine said, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "There are women in this city, women like us, who've been used, discarded, or betrayed by powerful men. We've started an informal network, information sharing, mutual support, that sort of thing." "What kind of information?"
The kind that ruins careers, destroys reputations, and occasionally lands people in prison. Her smile was sharp as a blade. Men love to confess their sins to beautiful women. We've learned to remember everything they say. Catherine handed me a business card with only a phone number on it. Call me when you're ready to turn the tables. The private investigator's report arrived exactly 72 hours later, delivered by a nondescript woman who handed me a thick manila envelope and disappeared before I could say thank you. What I found inside exceeded my expectations. Robert and Patricia had indeed upgraded their lifestyle significantly. New house in an exclusive neighborhood, new cars, expensive furniture, luxury vacations. But more interesting were their current financial obligations. They'd invested my earnings in a get-rich-quick scheme, a tech startup that promised revolutionary advances in cryptocurrency mining. The company was run by a smooth-talking entrepreneur named Jake Morrison, who had a history of securities fraud. Robert and Patricia had put in $200,000 and expected to triple their money within 6 months. The problem was that Jake Morrison's company was already under federal investigation for fraud. Within weeks, it would be shut down and all investor funds would be frozen. Robert and Patricia would lose everything they'd gained from selling me, plus they'd be liable for taxes on money that no longer existed. But the most interesting detail was buried on page 12 of the report. Patricia had been making regular visits to a fertility clinic. At 52 years old, she was desperately trying to get pregnant through IVF treatments that cost $30,000 per attempt. She wanted a baby, a real child, to replace the burden they'd sold off. I spent the rest of the evening studying the report, memorizing every detail. Robert worked construction when he could find jobs, but his drinking had made him unreliable. Patricia had taken a part-time job at a department store cosmetics counter, trying to maintain the image of prosperity while their finances crumbled. They were already failing. The question was whether I wanted to simply watch them fall or give them a push. The next day, I called Catherine Fairfield. "I wondered when you'd reach out," she said when I identified myself. "I need help with a problem. 2 people who need to understand the consequences of their choices." "What kind of consequences?" "Total destruction, financial, social, emotional. I want them to lose everything they value and understand exactly why it's happening." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "That's more comprehensive than our usual operations. What did they do to you?" "They sold me." "To Harrison?" "Yes." Another pause. "Where would you like to meet?" We arranged to have coffee the following afternoon at a small cafe in Capitol Hill. Catherine arrived with another woman, a striking redhead in her 30s, who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Martinez. "Sarah specializes in psychological warfare," Catherine explained matter-of-factly. "She has a PhD in behavioral psychology and a personal vendetta against men who abuse their power." "What's your story?" I asked Sarah. "Former university professor. I had an affair with the department head who promised to leave his wife for me. Instead, he destroyed my career and reputation when I threatened to expose him. Now I help women get even with men who think they're untouchable." I told them about Robert and Patricia, about the sale, about the photograph. Catherine took notes while Sarah asked probing questions about their personalities, fears, and weaknesses. "They're already vulnerable," Sarah observed. "The fertility treatments suggest deep insecurity about their relationship and legacy. The bad investment shows poor judgment and desperation. We can work with that." "What do you have in mind?" I asked. Catherine smiled. "We're going to give them everything they think they want, and then we're going to take it all away, piece by piece, until they beg for mercy." "How?" "Leave that to us," Sarah said. "But first, we need you to do something that might be difficult." "What?" "You need to go home. Make contact. Let them see that you've not only survived, but thrived. Their guilt will make them vulnerable to manipulation." The thought of seeing Robert and Patricia again made my stomach turn. But Sarah was right. They needed to see what I'd become before I could properly destroy what they'd built.
There's something else, I said, pulling out the photograph that had started this conversation. Someone's been watching them, watching me. I need to know who. Catherine studied the image carefully. Professional photography, good equipment. This wasn't taken by some amateur. One of Harrison's people? Possibly. Or someone else with an interest in your situation. Catherine handed the photo back. We'll look into it. In the meantime, start planning your homecoming. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Excitement. For too long, I'd been reactive, responding to what others did to me. Now, finally, I was going to take control of the narrative. Robert and Patricia thought they'd gotten rid of their problem and secured their future. They had no idea that their problem had evolved into their worst nightmare. The girl they'd sold was coming home, and she was bringing hell with her. I chose a Saturday afternoon for my return, timing it perfectly when I knew they'd both be home. The Uber dropped me off 3 blocks away from their new address. I wanted to walk up to the house, to let the anticipation build. The neighborhood was everything their old one wasn't. Manicured lawns, luxury cars in every driveway, the kind of quiet that only money could buy. I found myself wondering how many other families here had bought their prosperity with someone else's pain. Their new house was a sprawling colonial with white columns and perfectly trimmed hedges. The BMW from the photograph sat in the driveway next to a brand new pickup truck. Wind chimes hung from the front porch, playing a gentle melody that would have been peaceful if I didn't know what it represented. I walked up the stone pathway in my designer heels, wearing a tailored black dress that probably cost more than Patricia made in a month at her cosmetics counter. My hair was professionally styled, my makeup flawless. I looked like a success incarnate. When I rang the doorbell, I heard Patricia's voice call out, "Coming!" The door swung open, and her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally, something that might have been fear. "Hello, Patricia," I said with a smile that could have cut glass. I was in the neighborhood. She stood frozen in the doorway, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Behind her, I heard Robert's heavy footsteps approaching. "Who is it, hun?" His voice died as he saw me standing there. The beer bottle in his hand slipped slightly, but he caught it before it could fall. "Surprise," I said, pushing past Patricia and walking into their foyer. The house was everything I'd expected: expensive furniture with no real taste, the kind of decorating that screams new money. "I love what you've done with the place. Blood money really does buy nice things, doesn't it?" "Janice," Robert finally managed, his face pale beneath his construction tan. "We weren't expecting." "Of course you weren't. You thought you'd gotten rid of me permanently." I strolled into their living room, admiring the leather furniture and giant television. But here I am, alive, well, and very successful. Patricia found her voice. "You look different." "I look expensive," I corrected, which I am. Turns out being sold into prostitution can be quite lucrative if you play your cards right. The word prostitution hit them like a physical blow. Patricia actually took a step backward. "Now, Janice," Robert started. That's not what you intended," I interrupted. "Really? Because I'm pretty sure you knew exactly what Harrison and Marcus were buying when you signed those papers." I sat down on their new couch without being invited, crossing my legs elegantly. The house was everything I'd expected: expensive furniture with no real taste, the kind of decorating that screams new money. "I love what you've done with the place. Blood money really does buy nice things, doesn't it?" "Janice," Robert finally managed, his face pale beneath his construction tan. "We weren't expecting." "Of course you weren't. You thought you'd gotten rid of me permanently." I strolled into their living room, admiring the leather furniture and giant television. But here I am, alive, well, and very successful. Patricia found her voice. "You look different." "I look expensive," I corrected, which I am. Turns out being sold into prostitution can be quite lucrative if you play your cards right. The word prostitution hit them like a physical blow. Patricia actually took a step backward. Now, Janice, Robert started. That's not what you intended, I interrupted. Really? Because I'm pretty sure you knew exactly what Harrison and Marcus were buying when you signed those papers. I sat down on their new couch without being invited, crossing my legs elegantly. But I'm not here to relitigate the past. I'm here because I wanted you to see how well I'm doing. We're glad you're okay, Patricia said weakly. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been enjoying the profits from my suffering. I gestured around the room. New house, new cars, new life. All bought with the money you got for selling your stepdaughter. Robert's jaw tightened. We didn't have a choice. The bank was going to foreclose. There's always a choice, Robert. You chose your comfort over my safety. You chose money over family. And now, I'm here to show you that choices have consequences. I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through photos. Me at expensive restaurants, at charity galas, in designer clothes, with powerful men. This is my life now. I dine with senators, attend galas with judges, have drinks with billionaires. I've learned how the world really works. Patricia sat down heavily in a chair across from me. Janice, we're sorry. We never meant for what? For me to succeed? For me to thrive? For me to become more powerful than you ever imagined? I stood up, smoothing my dress. I walked to their mantelpiece, studying the family photos they'd displayed. Most were of them together, but I noticed a few older pictures that included me as a child. They'd kept me in their happy family narrative, even after selling me. Tell me about the fertility treatments, Patricia. The blood drained from her face. I know everything about you. The IVF treatments, the failed investments, Robert's drinking problem that's getting worse, your part-time job that barely covers the interest on your new lifestyle. I turned to face them. Did you really think you could start over? Have a real child to replace the one you sold? Patricia began to cry. We wanted a fresh start, a chance to do things right. Do things right? I laughed, but there was no humor. You're 52 years old, spending your last savings on fertility treatments that have less than a 5% chance of success. You've invested my blood money in a company that's about to be shut down by the FBI. And you think that's doing things right? Robert's face went white. What do you mean, shut down by the FBI? Oh, you didn't know? Jake Morrison's cryptocurrency venture is a federal investigation away from bankruptcy. All investor funds will be frozen, and anyone who profited from the scheme will be liable for tax penalties. You'll owe the government more money than you ever made from selling me. I watched the information hit them like a physical blow. Patricia's sobbing intensified, and Robert sank into his chair like he'd been deflated. But here's the really beautiful part, I continued. I could help you. I have connections now, powerful friends who could make your problems disappear. I could probably even get some of your investment back before the feds freeze everything. Hope flickered in their eyes. You would do that? Patricia asked. For family? Of course. I smiled sweetly. All you have to do is ask. The room fell silent, except for Patricia's sniffling. I could see them wrestling with their pride, their guilt, their desperation. They needed my help, but asking for it would mean admitting what they'd done. Finally, Robert cleared his throat. Janice, if you have connections who might be able to help us, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you clearly. What exactly are you asking me to do? His face reddened. We're asking for your help. With what, specifically? Patricia looked up at me with mascara-streaked cheeks. Please help us save our house, our investments, our future. I pretended to consider this. You want me to use the connections I made while working as a prostitute, the career you forced me into, to save you from the consequences of your own poor decisions? They both nodded miserably.
Well, I said, checking my expensive watch, I'll think about it. But right now, I have a dinner appointment with a federal judge who specializes in financial crimes. Fascinating man. He loves hearing about investment fraud cases. I headed toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Patricia, you might want to skip the next IVF treatment.
You're going to need that money for lawyers soon. As I walked down their front path, I heard Patricia wailing inside the house. Robert was shouting, probably about the investments, probably about me. Their perfect new life was already cracking apart, and I'd barely gotten started. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Fairfield. Phase 1 complete? I typed back, Phase 1 complete. They're desperate and scared. Ready for Phase 2. Excellent. Sarah has some ideas about the fertility clinic angle. Meet us tomorrow? Wouldn't miss it. As I waited for my Uber, I looked back at the house that my suffering had bought. Tomorrow, Catherine and Sarah would help me turn the screws tighter. We'd give Robert and Patricia hope, then snatch it away. We'd make them believe salvation was possible, then show them it was all an illusion. They'd taught me that family meant nothing when money was on the line. Now I was going to teach them that money meant nothing when the family came calling for revenge. The scared, helpless girl they'd sold 8 months ago was gone forever. In her place stood someone who understood power, who had learned to play their game better than they ever could. And the game was just beginning. The fertility clinic was a study in hope and desperation. Soft pastel walls, classical music, and pamphlets promising miracles to women who'd already given up on natural conception. I sat in the waiting room, observing the couples who clutched each other's hands with the desperation of drowning people grasping at life preservers. Dr. Sarah Martinez had been brilliant in her planning. "We're going to give Patricia exactly what she wants," she'd explained during our meeting, "and then we're going to make sure it destroys her." I was there under the identity Sarah had created for me, a wealthy philanthropist interested in funding fertility research. The clinic director, Dr. Rebecca Chen, greeted me personally, clearly eager to court a potential major donor. "Miss Williams, thank you so much for your interest in our program," Dr. Chen said, leading me to her office. "I understand you're considering establishing a foundation to help women in need." "That's correct," I replied, settling into the leather chair across from her desk. "I'm particularly interested in women over 50 who are pursuing IVF. I understand the success rates are quite low, but the emotional investment is enormous." Dr. Chen nodded sympathetically. "It's one of the most challenging patient populations we serve. The success rate for women over 50 is less than 3%, but the hope they carry, it's both inspiring and heartbreaking." "I'd like to sponsor a specific patient," I said, pulling out a folder Sarah had prepared. "Patricia Hendricks. I understand she's been undergoing treatments here." Dr. Chen's expression became guarded. "I can't discuss specific patients without their consent. Of course, but hypothetically, if I were to fund additional treatments for someone in her situation, what would that involve?" "Well, hypothetically, a woman of that age would require the most advanced and expensive treatments available. Donor eggs, extensive hormone therapy, specialized monitoring. The cost could easily exceed $100,000. Perfect. I leaned forward with practiced enthusiasm. "And what about psychological support? Surely the emotional toll is significant." "Absolutely. We recommend counseling for all our patients, especially those facing challenging odds." I spent another hour discussing the clinic's programs, learning about their procedures, their success rates, and their most vulnerable patients. Dr. Chen was happy to share details, especially when I mentioned my willingness to fund cutting-edge research. As I left the clinic, I called Patricia's number, one of many details the private investigator had provided. "Hello?" Her voice was tired, defeated. "Patricia, it's Janice. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday." A long pause. "Oh, hello. I wanted to let you know that I've spoken to some of my contacts about your situation. There might be a way to help you." "Really?" The hope in her voice was pathetic and perfect. "I met with a financial advisor who specializes in recovering funds from fraudulent investments. He thinks there's a chance we could get some of your money back before the federal investigation freezes everything." "Oh my God, Janice, that would be—" "But there's a condition," I interrupted. "He needs complete financial transparency, bank records, investment documents, everything. And he charges a substantial retainer fee." "How much?" $50,000. "But if he recovers your funds, it would be worth 10 times that amount." I heard her sharp intake of breath. "We don't have $50,000.
I know. That's why I'm prepared to loan it to you. Consider it a family loan. The silence stretched out as she processed this. Finally, why would you do that for us? Because, despite everything, you're still family, and I understand what desperation feels like. We arranged to meet the next day. I spent the evening with Catherine and Sarah, refining our plan. She'll take the loan, Sarah predicted. Desperate people always convince themselves that the next opportunity will save them. I asked, and when she does? Catherine said, with a smile that would have terrified lesser mortals. The next day, I met Robert and Patricia at a coffee shop downtown. They looked like they'd aged years in the past 48 hours. Patricia's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and Robert's hands shook slightly. Whether from alcohol withdrawal or nerves, I couldn't tell.
You're really willing to loan us the money? Patricia asked without preamble. I am, I replied, sliding a legal document across the table. Standard loan agreement, $50,000 at market interest rates, to be repaid within 12 months. Robert scanned the document. This looks legitimate. It is legitimate. I've learned to protect myself legally. I watched them read through the terms. There's just one additional requirement. They looked up at me suspiciously. I want you to write a letter, I said, a detailed confession explaining exactly what you did to me and why, how you sold me to Harrison, what you received in return, and how you've spent the money since. Why? Robert demanded. Insurance. If you default on the loan, I want legal documentation of the circumstances that necessitated it. Consider it collateral. Patricia's face went white. Janice, we can't put that in writing. Then you don't get the money. I started to stand up. I'm offering you a lifeline here. Take it or leave it. They huddled together, whispering urgently. I could see the desperation winning out over caution. Finally, Patricia nodded. We'll write the letter. Excellent. You have 24 hours to get me the confession and sign the loan documents. My financial advisor wants to move quickly before the federal investigation progresses. I left them there, knowing they'd spend the rest of the day convincing themselves this was their salvation. That night, I had dinner with Thomas Blackwood, who'd become my closest confidant in this strange world. You're playing a dangerous game, he observed as we shared wine at his favorite restaurant. Dangerous for whom? For everyone involved. Revenge has a way of consuming the person seeking it. I considered this. Maybe. But some betrayals are too big to forgive. And what happens when you've destroyed them completely? What then? I didn't have an answer for that. I'd been so focused on the destruction that I hadn't thought much about what would come after. The next evening, Patricia called to say they had the confession ready. We met at their house, where they handed me 5 pages of handwritten details about my sale. Reading it was like reliving a nightmare, but seeing their shame and guilt in writing was intoxicating. I gave them the check for $50,000 and watched their faces light up with relief and gratitude. They actually thanked me for helping them avoid the consequences of selling their own daughter. The financial advisor will contact you within a week, I lied smoothly. He'll need access to all your accounts to begin the recovery process. After I left, I drove to Catherine's house, where she and Sarah were waiting with champagne. Phase 3 begins now, Catherine announced, raising her glass. What exactly is Phase 3? I asked. Sarah smiled. We're going to use their $50,000, your money technically, to fund the most elaborate psychological torture campaign ever devised. We're going to give Patricia the baby she wants so desperately, and then we're going to take it away in the most devastating manner possible. How? The fertility clinic is very interested in your foundation's research grant, Catherine explained. Enough money to ensure Patricia gets pregnant. We'll make sure she has the baby she's dreamed of.
And then? Then we'll prove she's an unfit mother and have the child removed by social services. The confession letter you have will be excellent evidence of her character. I stared at them, suddenly understanding the full scope of what we were planning. This wasn't just revenge, it was the complete and total destruction of two human beings. I started, then stopped. Was I about to say it was too cruel, too extreme? These were the people who'd sold me into sexual slavery to pay their bills. Perfect, I finished. It's perfect. We spent the rest of the evening planning every detail. By the time I went home that night, Patricia and Robert's fate was sealed. They thought they'd been saved by their victim's mercy. They had no idea they'd just signed their own death warrant. Within 6 months, Patricia would be pregnant with the child she'd always wanted. Within 7 months, that child would be taken away forever, and they'd understand that mercy was the one thing I'd never learned to give. The scared girl they'd sold was gone. In her place stood something much more dangerous. Someone who understood that true revenge wasn't about quick satisfaction. It was about making your enemies destroy themselves, slowly and completely, until they begged for the mercy that would never come. 18 months after I'd walked back into their lives, I stood in a federal courthouse watching Robert and Patricia being led away in handcuffs. The judge had just sentenced them to 5 years in federal prison for money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. But that wasn't the real punishment. That had come 6 months earlier. Patricia had given birth to a beautiful baby girl she named Hope. For 3 precious months, she'd experienced the pure joy of motherhood she'd craved for so long. She'd decorated a nursery, bought tiny clothes, spent sleepless nights rocking her daughter while singing lullabies. And then social services arrived with a court order. The confession letter Patricia had written, the one detailing how they'd sold their stepdaughter into prostitution, had made its way to the right authorities. Combined with evidence of their financial crimes and Robert's alcoholism, it painted a picture of 2 people utterly unfit to raise a child. I'd watched from across the street as they carried baby Hope out of the house, while Patricia screamed and collapsed on her front lawn. The sound of her anguish had been music to my ears. But even that wasn't the end. The fertility clinic foundation I'd established had been designed to fail spectacularly. When the authorities investigated the suspicious funding sources, they'd discovered that Patricia had used fraudulent loan money to pay for treatments. The clinic faced massive fines and potential closure. Patricia was banned from ever attempting IVF again. The fake financial advisor had, of course, never existed. The $50,000 they'd borrowed from me had simply vanished into a web of offshore accounts that led nowhere. When they defaulted on the loan, I'd foreclosed on their house, their cars, everything they'd bought with my blood money.
Now, as they were led away to begin their prison sentences, I felt something I hadn't expected: emptiness. "Satisfied?" came a familiar voice behind me. I turned to find David Chen standing in the courthouse hallway, impeccably dressed as always. He'd been following the case with interest. Several of his business associates had been caught up in the Jake Morrison investment scandal. "I thought I would be," I admitted. "Revenge rarely provides the satisfaction we expect," he said, following into step beside me as we left the courthouse. "It's like drinking salt water when you're thirsty. It feels like it should help, but it only makes the thirst worse." We walked in silence for several blocks before I finally spoke. They destroyed my childhood, my innocence, my trust in my family. They sold me like cattle to pay their bills. And now they've lost everything they valued: their freedom, their home, their child, their future. Most people would call that justice. But not you? David stopped walking and turned to face me. "I call it a waste of extraordinary talent. You've spent 2 years of your life orchestrating their destruction. In that same time, you could have built an empire." He was right, of course. I'd become obsessed with revenge to the exclusion of everything else. I'd turned down legitimate opportunities, ended relationships, and isolated myself from anyone who might have cared about me. I'd won my war against Robert and Patricia, but I'd lost myself in the process. "What do you suggest I do now?" I asked. "Come work for me, legitimately this time. No more clients, no more Harrison, no more games. Use your intelligence and strategic mind to build something instead of destroying it." I considered his offer as we continued walking. The sun was setting over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the city, Harrison was probably interviewing new girls to replace the ones who'd escaped or aged out of his service. Somewhere else, other families were probably making the same choice Robert and Patricia had made, choosing money over the people they claimed to love. "There's something I need to do first," I said finally. That evening, I drove to the apartment building where I'd lived for over a year. My keycard still worked, though I'd moved out months ago. I took the elevator to the 32nd floor and walked down the familiar hallway to apartment 3247. The door was open. Inside, I could hear voices. A man giving instructions to someone younger, nervous. Harrison was breaking in with another girl. I walked into the apartment without knocking. Harrison looked up in surprise. "Janice, I wasn't expecting you." "I'm sure you weren't." The girl sitting on the couch couldn't have been older than 18. She had the same terrified, defiant look I'd worn on my first day. Her name tag, from what looked like a fast food job, was still pinned to her shirt. "What's your name?" I asked her. "Madison," she whispered. "Madison, how did you end up here?" She glanced nervously at Harrison, who nodded for her to answer. "My mom's boyfriend, he owes some people money. They said this would pay off his debts." The same story, different names, same betrayal. I turned to Harrison. "We need to talk, alone." He led me into the office I remembered so well. "You look good," he said, attempting his usual charm. "Success suits you." "Cut the act, Harrison. We both know why I'm here." "Do we?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a photograph. It was Harrison himself, taken at a downtown restaurant with Senator Walsh and 2 federal judges. All of them were clients I'd serviced. All of them were about to be exposed. "What do you want?" he asked, his facade finally dropping. "I want you out of business, permanently." I placed a thick envelope on his desk. "Inside, you'll find documented evidence of your entire operation. Client lists, financial records, photographs, recordings, everything I've collected over the past 2 years." Harrison opened the envelope with shaking hands. His face went pale as he saw the scope of what I'd gathered. "You have 24 hours to shut down your operation and disappear. Release every girl currently in your employ. Destroy their contracts. Give them enough money to start over." "And if I don't?" "This evidence goes to the FBI, the Seattle Times, and every major news outlet in the country. Your clients will turn on you to save themselves. You'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison if you live that long." I stood up to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Harrison, the girl out there, Madison, she's coming with me." "You can't just—" "I can, and I am. Her mother's boyfriend's debt? I'm paying it off. Madison gets to choose her own future." I walked back to the living room where Madison sat frozen in terror. "Madison, you have a choice to make," I told her. "You can stay here and let these people destroy your life, or you can come with me and build something better." She looked at me with desperate hope. "What's the catch?" "No catch, but it won't be easy. You'll have to work hard, study, and prove yourself every day. The world isn't going to hand you anything." Madison stood up, her decision made. "Anything's better than this." 6 months later, I sat in my new office overlooking downtown Seattle. The nameplate on my desk read, "Janice Williams, Director of Strategic Development, Chen Technologies." Madison was enrolled in community college and working part-time as my assistant. She was smart, driven, and reminded me daily that not every story had to end in destruction. Harrison had vanished as promised. His operation had been dismantled, his girls freed.
Some had found legitimate work, others had simply disappeared into new lives. The powerful men who'd been his clients lived in constant fear that their secrets would be exposed, making them easier to manipulate in legitimate business dealings. Robert and Patricia were serving their sentences in separate federal facilities. Patricia would never see her daughter again. Hope had been adopted by a loving family who would give her the security and stability she deserved. Sometimes I wondered if they thought about me in their prison cells, if they understood that their destruction had been authored by the girl they'd sold. I'd kept one souvenir from my old life, the photograph that had started my final campaign against them. I'd had it framed and hung in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that family wasn't about blood or legal obligations. It was about the choices people make when those bonds are tested. Robert and Patricia had chosen money over family. I'd chosen revenge over mercy. But Madison had chosen trust over fear, and maybe that was the beginning of something better. As I looked out at the city that had been the stage for my transformation, I realized that David Chen had been right. Revenge was like drinking salt water. It never truly satisfied the thirst. But building something new, helping someone else escape the trap I'd fallen into, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, that was a different kind of satisfaction entirely. The scared girl who'd been sold 18 months ago was finally truly dead. In her place stood someone who understood that real power wasn't about destroying your enemies. It was about making sure they could never hurt anyone else again. My family had chosen money over me, but I'd chosen to break the cycle, to be the family that someone else needed when the world turned against them. And for the first time since this nightmare began, that felt like victory. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit thy bell to never miss our latest uploads.